I have a small wooden box on my bookshelf. It's made of cherry wood about the size of a shoebox with a brass latch that's gone slightly green with age. Inside the box are 47 recipe cards, handwritten in my grandmother's handwriting, and then mine, layered over 3 generations. The cards are stained with olive oil and tomato sauce and wine, smudged with flour and touched by hundreds of hands over 60 years. These cards are the only thing I managed to take with me the day I lost my restaurant. Not because they were the most valuable thing, though they were valuable in ways that have nothing to do with money, but because they were in my apartment rather than in the restaurant office when everything happened. Every other recipe, every other piece of intellectual property I had developed over 15 years, every notebook of techniques and supplier relationships and menu concepts, all of that was locked inside a restaurant I could no longer enter, held by a person I had trusted with everything. That person's name is Julian Santos. Julian Santos was my Sous chef for 7 years. I hired him when he was 22 years old, fresh out of culinary school, talented but raw, hungry in the way that young cooks are hungry when they've tasted what excellence is and want desperately to create it themselves. I trained him. I taught him everything I knew about French technique and Italian ingredients, and the specific alchemy that happens when you stop following recipes and start understanding food. I gave him opportunities and responsibility and trust that most Sous chefs don't get until they've been in the industry for twice as long. I treated him like family, like the son I never had. Like the successor I was building, the person who would carry forward what I had built when I was ready to step back. He used that trust to take everything. And the way he did it, the precision, the patience, the exploitation of the exact moment when I was most vulnerable, that's what I still think about late at night when I can't sleep. Not the theft itself, but the calculation behind it. The knowledge that he had been planning it for months, maybe years, and had been waiting for the perfect moment to execute. That moment came when my mother was dying. My name is Alexandra Rossi. Everyone calls me Alex. I am 43 years old. I am a Michelin guide inspector for the Western United States, which means I travel to restaurants, eat anonymously, evaluate them against the specific standards the guide maintains, and make recommendations about which restaurants deserve stars and which stars should be removed. It is one of the most powerful positions in the restaurant industry, a position that shapes careers and reputations and the financial futures of establishments that have built everything around the pursuit of culinary excellence. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in my car in a parking lot in Oakland, California, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from absolutely nothing after losing my restaurant, my reputation, my savings, and my sense that the world operated according to any principles I understood. This is the story of what happened between those 2 points, and what I did when I finally had the power to address what had been done to me. Let me start at the beginning. I grew up in a restaurant, not metaphorically, literally. My grandmother owned a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, San Francisco, called Stella's, and my mother and I lived in the apartment above it. The restaurant was the family business, the family gathering place, the family identity. My earliest memories are of being in that kitchen, small enough to walk under the prep tables, watching my grandmother's hands move through the rituals of cooking with a precision and authority that seemed almost sacred. My grandmother taught me to cook before she taught me to read. That's not an exaggeration. I could make fresh pasta by the time I was 4 years old. My hands were small enough to really work the dough, she said. By the time I was 7, I was helping with prep. By the time I was 12, I was working the line on busy nights. I went to culinary school at 17, the Culinary Institute of America in Napa Valley, not because I needed the credential, but because my grandmother insisted I learn the formal technique, the French foundations, the classical training that would let me build on what she had taught me. I worked in restaurants in San Francisco for 8 years after culinary school. Good restaurants, 1 Michelin star places, kitchens where excellence was the baseline expectation and anything less was unacceptable. I learned from chefs who had trained in France and Italy. I developed my technique and my palate and my understanding of what food could be when it was treated as art rather than fuel. And when my grandmother died in 2008, she left me Stella's. The restaurant was nearly 60 years old at that point. It had a loyal following, a solid reputation, and a lease on a building in North Beach that was protected under San Francisco's tenant protections for legacy businesses. It also had equipment that was held together with improvisation and hope, a menu that hadn't substantially changed since 1973, and and a financial model that barely broke even in good months. I spent a year deciding what to do with it. I could have run it as it was, maintained my grandmother's vision, kept the red sauce and the checkered tablecloths and the particular version of Italian-American food that had made it a neighborhood institution. That would have been the respectful choice, the safe choice. I didn't make that choice. I closed Stella's for 3 months. I gutted the kitchen and rebuilt it. I changed the name to Rossi's. I kept some of my grandmother's recipes, the ones that were genuinely excellent, the ones that had technique and soul and could hold up against anything, and I built a new menu around them that was modern Italian, technique-driven, using the best ingredients I could source. I reopened in March 2009, right as the economy was cratering, which was either terrible timing or perfect timing, depending on how you looked at it. People who still had money to spend on restaurants were looking for value, and we offered something that felt substantial and real in a moment when a lot of things didn't. We got a good review from the Chronicle, then another from SF Weekly. Then a longer feature in Eater about young chefs reimagining classic San Francisco restaurants. And we got busy, genuinely, sustainably busy. I hired Julian Santos in 2011. He had graduated from the California Culinary Academy 2 years prior and had been working at a hotel restaurant in Union Square, the kind of place that does volume, that teaches you speed and consistency, but not necessarily artistry. He wanted to work in a smaller, more creative environment. He applied to Rossi's with a resume that was thin but sincere and a cover letter that talked about wanting to learn from a chef who understood both classical technique and modern interpretation. I interviewed him on a Tuesday afternoon. He was 22 years old, small and compact in the way that's useful in a kitchen, with careful hands and eyes that tracked everything, where I moved, what I touched, how I held a knife when I demonstrated a technique during the interview. Why do you want to work here? I asked him because you're doing what I want to learn to do, he said. You're taking something traditional and making it better without making it unrecognizable. That's the hardest thing to do well. I hired him as a line cook. He was good. Not immediately exceptional. He had habits from the hotel kitchen that needed to be unlearned, a tendency to prioritize speed over precision that works in high-volume environments, but not in the kind of cooking we did. But he was teachable and he was hungry, and he stayed late to practice techniques and came in early to do prep and asked questions that indicated he was actually thinking about the why behind what we did. I promoted him to junior Sous chef after 18 months. To Sous chef after another year. By 2014, Julian was my right hand. He knew the menu as well as I did. He could run the kitchen when I wasn't there. He had developed relationships with our suppliers and our front-of-house staff and the small ecosystem of people that makes a restaurant function. I trusted him with keys, with passwords, with vendor accounts, with decisions about purchasing and prep and the 100 small things that keep a kitchen operating. He was, I thought, exactly what I'd hoped he would become, a partner in everything but equity, someone who shared my vision and could execute it at the level it required. I never thought about making him an actual partner. The restaurant was mine, my grandmother's legacy, my creation, my risk. Julian was an employee, a valued one, but an employee. He had a good salary, a share of tips, the kind of responsibility and creative input that most Sous chefs don't get. I thought that was enough. I was wrong about it. The first sign that something was wrong came in May 2017, but I didn't recognize it as a sign until much later. One of our prep cooks, a young woman named Maria who had been with us for 2 years, gave her notice. She was moving to Los Angeles, she said, for family reasons. I wished her well and started looking for a replacement. 2 weeks later, our pastry chef left. He had been offered a position at a bakery in Oakland, he said. Better hours, less pressure. A month after that, our fish supplier, a small operation out of Half Moon Bay that I had been working with for 6 years, called to tell me they were discontinuing our account. Why? I asked. Has there been a problem with our orders? No problem, the owner said, but his voice was uncomfortable. We're just restructuring our client list, focusing on larger accounts. We've been ordering from you for 6 years, I said. We're one of your most consistent restaurants. I know, Alex, I'm sorry, it's a business decision. I found a new fish supplier. I hired a new prep cook and a new pastry chef. I chalked it up to the normal churn of restaurant operations, which is high, people leave, suppliers change, it's part of the industry. I didn't see the pattern. In July, my produce supplier called with a similar message. They were discontinuing our account, restructuring, focusing on different clients. This is the second supplier in 2 months, I said to Julian. We were in the office going over invoices. Is there something going on that I should know about? He looked up from the laptop. What do you mean? Two suppliers dropping us, staff leaving. It feels like something's happening. Suppliers change their client lists all the time, he said, and staff turnover is normal in restaurants. You know that, I know. It just feels like more than usual. We're fine, Alex, he said. The kitchen is running well. The reviews are good. We're fully booked most nights. This is just the normal chaos of the industry. I let it go. I found new suppliers. I hired new staff. The restaurant continued to operate at the level it always had, and I missed the fact that Julian was systematically building relationships with my staff and my suppliers, and positioning himself as the person they should be loyal to, not me. I missed it because I was focused on the food, on the customers, on the 100 details that running a restaurant requires, and because I trusted Julian completely. My mother got sick in September 2017, not sick in the slow, manageable way, sick in the sudden, catastrophic way. A stroke severe, followed by complications that put her in the ICU at UCSF Medical Center, with a prognosis that the doctors described carefully as uncertain. I was at the hospital every day. My mother and I had been close in the complicated way of mothers and daughters who have lived together in small spaces and worked together in high-pressure environments. We had our difficulties, but she was my mother, and she was dying, and there was nowhere else I was going to be. Julian ran the restaurant while I was at the hospital. He had done this before. I had taken vacations, had occasional days off, and Julian had always managed the kitchen beautifully. I had no concerns about leaving him in charge for what I thought would be a few weeks. It was 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sitting in hospital rooms and talking to doctors and making decisions about care and watching my mother diminish in the particular terrible way that strokes diminish people. She died on November 3rd, a Friday evening, with me holding her hand. I took the following week off. I had told Julian I would need the time for the funeral and for beginning to sort through my mother's affairs. He said, of course, take whatever time I needed. The restaurant was fine. I returned to work on Monday, November 13th. I drove to the restaurant at 10 a.m., my usual time for starting prep. I parked in the small lot behind the building where I always parked. I walked to the back door and put my key in the lock. The key didn't work. I tried it again. The key went into the lock but didn't turn. I tried the front door. Same problem. I called Julian. Hey, I said when he answered. I'm at the restaurant and my keys aren't working. Did you change the locks? A pause. A very brief pause, but I heard it. Alex, he said, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the Starbucks on Columbus? Why can't we talk at the restaurant? I said. What's going on? Please, he said. Just meet me at the Starbucks. 20 minutes. I drove to the Starbucks. I sat at a table near the window and felt something cold forming in my stomach, a sense of wrongness that I couldn't yet name. Julian arrived exactly 20 minutes later. He sat down across from me with a folder in his hands. Alex, he said. I'm sorry to do this now, especially after everything with your mother, but there's a situation we need to address. What situation? He opened the folder. Inside was a document, multiple pages, legal-size paper, dense text. While you were dealing with your mother's situation, he said, some things came up with the restaurant that required immediate attention. Financial things. The rent increased. The landlord notified us of a substantial increase that takes effect next month. We had some equipment failures that needed immediate repair or replacement. We had a health inspection that identified some issues with the kitchen that need to be addressed for us to maintain our permit. I stared at him. Why didn't you tell me any of this? You were at the hospital with your dying mother, he said. I wasn't going to burden you with restaurant problems when you were dealing with that. I made the decision to handle it. Handle it how? I secured emergency financing to cover the immediate costs, the rent, the equipment, the inspection repairs. I also restructured some of our vendor relationships to get better terms and stabilize our cash flow. Julian, you don't have the authority to secure financing or restructure vendor relationships. The restaurant is in my name. You can't sign contracts. I can actually, he said, and pushed the document across the table to me. Because of this, I looked at the document. It was dated 3 months prior, August 2017, before my mother got sick, and it was signed by me, except I had never seen it before. The document was titled Partnership Agreement, and it outlined the terms by which Julian Santos was being brought on as a 50% equity partner in Rossi's, with full authority to make financial and operational decisions on behalf of the business. My signature was at the bottom. I had never signed this document. I had never seen this document. I had certainly never agreed to give Julian 50% equity in my restaurant. I didn't sign this, I said. You did, Julian said, in August. We had a conversation about bringing me on as a partner, about formalizing my role. You said you wanted to step back a little, focus more on the creative side and less on the operations. This was the agreement. Julian, my voice was very steady. I never had that conversation with you. I never signed this. This signature is forged. It's witnessed, he said, pointing to two signature lines at the bottom that had names I vaguely recognized, a server who had left in September, and Maria, the prep cook who had moved to Lowe's Angels. Those people don't work here anymore, I said. No, he said. They work at the new location I'm opening in Oakland. They came with me when I transitioned some of the team. The cold feeling in my stomach was now ice. What are you talking about? Alex, he said, and his voice had the careful patience of someone explaining something to a child. The restaurant industry is changing. The North Beach location is expensive, the rent is increasing, and the economics don't work anymore. I've been planning to open a second location in Oakland. Lower rent, growing food scene, better economics. I've transitioned some of the team to help me launch that. The North Beach location will continue to operate, but under new management structure that reflects the partnership agreement. There is no partnership agreement, I said. I never signed that. This is fraud. You can contest it if you want, he said, but it's going to be expensive and time-consuming, and in the meantime, the restaurant needs to operate. I've changed the locks for security reasons. We had some concerns about unauthorized access. I'll get you a new set of keys once we've formalized the transition plan. I looked at him across the table, at the person I had trained and trusted and treated like family. At the face that was calm and reasonable and completely devoid of anything that looked like conscience. You planned this, I said. You've been planning this for months. I've been planning to grow the business, he said. That's what good operators do. You were focused on the food, which is great, but someone needed to focus on the business side. That's what I've been doing. You forged my signature. You stole my staff and my suppliers. You locked me out of my own restaurant. I secured the necessary documentation to protect the business during a period when the primary owner was unavailable due to personal crisis, he said. Everything I've done has been for the benefit of Rossi's. He stood up. I'll have my lawyer send you information about the transition plan, he said. And Alex, I really am sorry about your mother. I know this timing is difficult. He left. I sat in the Starbucks for approximately 40 minutes, unable to move, trying to process what had just happened. Then I drove to a lawyer's office. The lawyer's name was Catherine Moore, and she had been recommended by a friend as someone who specialized in business litigation and partnership disputes. I showed her the forged partnership agreement, explained the timeline, told her everything that had happened. She reviewed the document carefully. This signature, she said, pointing to mine. You're certain you didn't sign this? Absolutely certain. Can you prove that? What do you mean? Can you prove you didn't sign it? Do you have an alibi for the date it was signed? Documentation that you were somewhere else. Evidence that contradicts the claim that this conversation happened. I thought back to August. It was 3 months ago. I had been at the restaurant almost every day, which was normal. I couldn't remember specifically what I had been doing on whatever date was on this document. I don't know, I said. I'd have to check. But Catherine, I know I didn't sign this. I never agreed to this. I believe you, she said, but belief isn't evidence. In court, we'd need to prove forgery. That usually requires handwriting analysis, which is expensive and not always conclusive. We'd also need to explain why the witnesses, she pointed to the two signatures, would lie. Did Julian have leverage over them? Were they being compensated for their testimony? I don't know, I said. They both left shortly after this date. One moved to LA, one left for another job, or so they told me. They probably left because Julian asked them to after they served their purpose, Catherine said, but proving that is different from knowing it. What should I do? She was quiet for a moment. You have options. You can contest the partnership agreement as fraudulent. You can sue for return of the business to your sole control. But these things take time, months, possibly years, and they're expensive. Do you have resources to fund that kind of litigation? I thought about my bank account. I had some savings, maybe $30,000. I had been paying my mother's medical bills, the funeral costs, the beginning of settling her estate. I had rent on my apartment. I had my own living expenses. Not much, I said. Then we need to think about this strategically, she said. The restaurant is still operating, correct? I assume so. I'm locked out, but presumably Julian is running it. Is your name still on the bank accounts? I checked my phone, pulling up the restaurant's bank account online. I had access. The account showed normal operating activity, revenue coming in, expenses going out. Yes, I said. I still have access. Then you still have some leverage, she said, but you need to act quickly. If he's planning to transition full control to himself, he'll move to remove you from accounts, from permits, from anything that gives you legal standing. We should file an injunction immediately to freeze any changes to the business structure while we investigate the partnership agreement. How long will that take? To file, I can have it done this week. To actually get a hearing and a ruling, weeks, maybe months. And in the meantime, you wait, she said. You document everything. You gather evidence. You prepare for a long fight. I hired Catherine. I paid her retainer $5,000, which was money I didn't really have but could not spend. She filed the injunction 3 days later. Julian's lawyer responded with a counterfiling that argued the injunction was frivolous, that the partnership agreement was legitimate and legally binding, that I was attempting to renege on an agreement I had made and was now trying to undo through legal harassment. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. During those 6 weeks, I was locked out of my restaurant. I could see the bank account activity. The restaurant was operating normally, revenue was steady, but I couldn't access the physical space. Couldn't talk to staff, most of whom had been told some version of events by Julian that positioned him as the wronged partner and me as the unstable owner having a breakdown after her mother's death. Couldn't do anything except watch from the outside. I tried to work. I picked up some consulting work, helping other restaurants with menu development, which I could do remotely and which paid hourly. It was enough to cover rent and basic expenses, but not enough to build any kind of cushion. I went to the hearing in January 2018. The judge listened to both sides. Catherine presented our argument. The partnership agreement was fraudulent. I had never signed it. The timing of its execution and revelation was suspicious. Julian had systematically positioned himself to take control during a period when I was dealing with a family emergency. Julian's lawyer presented their argument. The partnership agreement was legitimate, properly witnessed, the result of months of conversation about formalizing Julian's role, and my current claims were the result of grief and stress clouding my judgment about decisions I had actually made. The judge took 2 weeks to rule. The ruling was that the injunction would remain in place temporarily. No changes to the business structure could be made, but that the underlying question of whether the partnership agreement was legitimate would need to be determined through a full trial. Timeline for that trial, 8 to 12 months. What do I do for 8 to 12 months? I asked Catherine. You survive, she said. You work, you save money for the trial, and you gather every piece of evidence you can find that supports your case. I survived barely. I worked consulting jobs. I picked up shifts at other restaurants, staging, working the line for day rates, anything that paid. The restaurant industry was small and word travels, and the word that was traveling was a version of the story that Julian had carefully constructed, that I had brought him on as a partner. That I was now trying to back out of the agreement, that I was unstable and difficult, and not someone you wanted to work with. I lost consulting clients. I stopped getting called for staging opportunities. My professional reputation, which I had spent 15 years building, dissolved in approximately 3 months. I couldn't make rent on my apartment in March. I moved to a cheaper place in Oakland, a studio, $1,400 a month, barely anything, but it was shelter. I couldn't make rent there in June. I moved into my car. I was 40 years old, a trained chef with 15 years of experience and a restaurant that had my name on it. And I was sleeping in a 2012 Toyota Camry in the parking lot of a 24-hour Safeway because I had nowhere else to go. The trial was scheduled for September 2018. In July, Catherine called me with news. Julian's lawyer has approached me about a settlement, she said. What kind of settlement? He's offering to buy out your equity stake. $75,000 for a full ownership share and your agreement to walk away from Rossi's permanently. I did the math in my head. The restaurant's annual revenue was approximately $1.2 million. The business itself, with the location and the reputation and the equipment, was worth probably $400,000 $500,000. My share, my full ownership that I had built from my grandmother's legacy, was worth significantly more than $75,000. That's insulting, I said. I agree, Catherine said, but I have to present it to you as an option. You're living in your car, Alex. You have no income. The trial is expensive and the outcome is uncertain. $75,000 would give you something to rebuild with. It's my restaurant, I said. My grandmother's restaurant. 15 years of my life. I'm not selling it to the person who stole it from me for $75,000. Then we go to trial, she said. We go to trial, I said. The trial started on September 17, 2018. It lasted 4 days. Catherine presented our case, the timeline, the suspicious circumstances, the pattern of Julian systematically positioning himself to take control, expert testimony from a handwriting analyst who said my signature on the partnership agreement showed characteristics consistent with forgery. Julian's lawyer presented their case, the two witnesses who testified, via video, from Los Angeles and Oakland respectively, that they had been present when I signed the agreement and that I had seemed clear and competent and had explicitly discussed wanting to bring Julian on as a partner. Julian's testimony that we had discussed the partnership for months and that I had been enthusiastic about formalizing his role. The judge took a week to rule. The ruling came on September 28th. The partnership agreement was deemed legally binding. The signature analysis was deemed inconclusive. The witnesses were deemed credible. The court found that I had likely signed the agreement and was now experiencing retroactive regret complicated by grief and financial stress. Julian was awarded legal recognition as a 50% partner with the authority he had already assumed. I was awarded nothing. I sat in the courtroom and heard the ruling and felt the floor disappear. Catherine put her hand on my arm. "I'm sorry, Alex, we can appeal, but what? But it's expensive and the likelihood of overturning this is small." The judge made credibility determinations about the witnesses. Appellate courts usually defer to that. "So it's over," I said. "The trial is over," she said. "What you do next is up to you." I walked out of the courthouse and got in my car and drove to the parking lot where I had been sleeping and sat there for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. I still had my laptop. I still had Wi-Fi from the Safeway, and I started researching. Not how to appeal, not how to keep fighting for Rossi's, how to rebuild something entirely different. Here's what I knew. I was a trained chef with 15 years of experience. I knew food at a level that most people don't reach. I knew technique and flavor and the specific alchemy that makes a dish work. I knew restaurants from the inside, how they operate, what makes them succeed, what makes them fail. I couldn't work in restaurants anymore. My reputation in the Bay Area was destroyed. No one was going to hire me, and I didn't have the resources to start another restaurant. But there were other ways to use what I knew. I started writing. I had never been a writer in any formal sense, but I had been documenting my cooking for years, recipes, techniques, notes on dishes I'd developed. I had a blog I'd maintained sporadically during the Rossi's years, mostly photos of dishes with brief descriptions. I started writing for real. Long-form pieces about cooking technique, about the restaurant industry, about what goes into building a dish that works. I wrote about Italian cooking, about my grandmother, about the specific traditions I had learned and how they translated into modern cooking. I started pitching to food publications. Most of them rejected me, a few accepted. I got my first piece published in Eater in November 2018, a long essay about the economics of running a small restaurant in San Francisco and why so many of them fail. It was based on my experience with Rossi's, though I didn't name the restaurant or Julian. I wrote about structural problems in the industry, about rising rents and thin margins and the difficulty of maintaining quality while staying financially viable. The piece got attention, good attention. Editors reached out. I pitched more pieces. I got published in Lucky Peach before it folded, in Bon Appetit, in Food and Wine. I made enough from the writing to move out of my car and into a room in a shared house in Oakland. $600 a month, a room that was barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but it was shelter and it wasn't my car. I kept writing. And I applied for a position I saw posted on a food industry job board, Michelin Guide Inspector for the Western United States. The Michelin Guide is the most prestigious restaurant rating system in the world. Its inspectors are anonymous, highly trained food professionals who evaluate restaurants against specific criteria and make recommendations about which establishments should receive Michelin stars, the highest honor in the culinary world. The job requirements were extensive: culinary training, substantial restaurant experience, willingness to travel constantly, ability to evaluate food objectively and write detailed reports, and complete anonymity. You could never reveal that you worked for Michelin. I had all the qualifications except the last one, which I was more than willing to embrace. Anonymity sounded like exactly what I needed. I applied with a resume that detailed my training and my experience but did not mention Rossi's. I listed my work at other restaurants, my culinary school education, my writing portfolio. I got an interview, then a second interview, then a third. In February 2019, I was offered the position. The job came with a salary, not an enormous one, but more than I had been making from writing. It came with a travel budget, a company credit card, and the specific understanding that my identity as an inspector was confidential and could not be disclosed to anyone, including family and friends. I accepted immediately. I was trained for 6 weeks at Michelin's headquarters, an intensive education in the guide's evaluation standards, the specific criteria we used, how to assess everything from ingredient quality to technique to service to ambience. I learned how to eat anonymously, how to make reservations under different names, how to observe without being observed, and then I started working. The job was exactly what I needed. I traveled constantly: San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Portland, Seattle, Las Vegas. I ate at 3 restaurants a day minimum, sometimes 4. I evaluated everything from hole-in-the-wall taco stands to 3 Michelin-star temples of haute cuisine. I was good at it. Better than good, I had the palate and the technical knowledge to assess food at the highest level, and I had the industry experience to understand the operational side of what made a restaurant work or fail. I wrote detailed reports. I made recommendations. Some of my recommendations led to stars being awarded, some led to stars being removed. I rebuilt my professional identity completely, not as Alexandra Rossi, the chef who had lost her restaurant to her Sous chef, as an anonymous Michelin inspector whose judgment shaped the industry. The position came with power, real power, the kind that I had never had at Rossi's, even when I owned it, and in October 2020, I received my assignment list for the next evaluation period. One of the restaurants on the list was Rossi's in North Beach, San Francisco. I sat with that assignment for 24 hours before I called my supervisor at Michelin. "I need to disclose a potential conflict," I said. "What kind of conflict?" "The restaurant Rossi's, I founded it. I was forced out 3 years ago under circumstances that were legally complicated. I haven't been involved since 2018, but I want to make sure there's no issue with me evaluating it." My supervisor was quiet for a moment. "Have you had any contact with the current ownership?" "None. 0 contact since the trial ended." "Do you think you can evaluate the restaurant objectively?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. "What happened between me and Julian Santos is separate from whether the food is good. I can assess it on the same criteria I use for every other restaurant." "Then there's no conflict," she said. "You're not personally involved anymore. You're not financially invested. You're just an inspector evaluating a restaurant. Do your job." "Understood," I said. I made a reservation at Rossi's under one of the names I used for inspections, Jennifer Walsh, for a Tuesday evening in November. I hadn't been inside the restaurant in 3 years. I walked in at 7 p.m. and was seated at a table near the window. Good table, good vantage point to observe the dining room and the kitchen. The space looked different. Julian had redecorated. New paint, new lighting, a different aesthetic that was more modern and less warm than what I had created. The menu was similar to what I had developed, but with changes. Some of my dishes were gone, new ones had been added. The descriptions had been rewritten in a style that was more verbose and less direct than how I had written them. I ordered the way I always ordered at inspections: multiple courses, a range of dishes that would let me assess the kitchen's breadth and consistency. The food came. It was good, not great good. The pasta was cooked properly, but the sauce lacked the depth I would have expected. The fish was fresh but slightly overcooked. The vegetables were high quality, but the preparation was uninspired. Everything was technically competent, but nothing was excellent. I was halfway through the main course when Julian came out of the kitchen. He was doing what chefs do, walking the dining room, checking on tables, the visible presence that customers expect from a chef owner. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had won. He was making his way through the dining room, table by table, when he looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. I watched his face cycle through expressions: recognition, shock, confusion, and then something that might have been fear. He stopped moving for just a moment, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. Then he continued to the table he had been heading toward, spoke briefly to the guests there, and disappeared back into the kitchen. I finished my meal. I took notes on my phone the way I always did. I paid the check with the Michelin corporate card and left. I wrote my evaluation report the next morning. The report was detailed and honest. I noted the quality of the ingredients, which was high. I noted the technique, which was competent but not exceptional. I noted the service, which was professional but lacked warmth. I noted the ambience, which had been updated in a way that made the restaurant feel more generic and less distinctive. My conclusion: Rossi's was a good neighborhood restaurant serving well-executed Italian food at a reasonable price point. It was not operating at a level that warranted Michelin recognition. No stars recommended. The previous year's evaluation, conducted by a different inspector before I joined the team, had given Rossi's a 1-star recommendation, which had been accepted. The restaurant had received its first Michelin star in the 2020 guide. My evaluation recommended removing that star. I submitted the report to my supervisor with a note: previous evaluation may have been generous. Current execution does not meet 1-star standards. 3 weeks later, my supervisor called. We're pulling the star, she said. Your evaluation was consistent with feedback we've gotten from other sources. The quality has declined since the star was awarded. We'll be announcing the new guide in February, and Rossi's will not be included. Understood, I said. In February 2021, the new Michelin guide was released. Rossi's lost its star. The announcement made news in the San Francisco food community. A restaurant losing a Michelin star is always significant, and Rossi's had only had it for 1 year before losing it. I saw Julian's statement in the press. We're disappointed by the decision, but remain committed to serving excellent food to our community. I saw the speculation in food blogs and Twitter about what had happened, whether the quality had declined, whether there had been changes in the kitchen, whether the loss of the original chef owner 3 years ago had finally caught up with them. I saw through industry connections that reservations at Rossi's dropped significantly in the weeks after the announcement, and I felt exactly what I expected to feel: not triumph, not satisfaction, nothing hot or reactive, just the quiet sense of a ledger balancing. I want to tell you what happened next because the story doesn't end with the star removal. Rossi's continued to operate. The loss of the star hurt, financially, reputationally, but the restaurant had a loyal neighborhood following, and Julian was competent enough to keep it running. I continued my work as an inspector. I evaluated hundreds of restaurants over the next 2 years. I contributed to the expansion of the Michelin Guide's coverage in the Western United States. I became senior enough in the organization that I was helping train new inspectors. I also continued writing. I published a book in 2022, a combination cookbook and memoir about my grandmother, about Stella's, about learning to cook in a family restaurant, about the recipes that had been passed down through generations. The book did well. Not bestseller well, but well enough that I got invited to do events, to speak at food conferences, to appear on podcasts. I was, for the first time since losing Rossi's, building something that was entirely mine and that no one could take from me. And then in March 2023, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Julian Santos. Alex, I saw your book. Congratulations on the success. I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking about what happened between us. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was wrong. I've been carrying that for 5 years. I wonder if we could talk. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for the chance to acknowledge what happened in person. I'll be in LA next month if you have time. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I called Dr. Torres, my therapist, who I'd been seeing since the worst period in Oakland, who had helped me process the anger and the grief and the sense of betrayal that had nearly consumed me. He wants to talk, I told Dr. Torres. What do you want? He asked. I don't know, I said. Part of me wants to hear him admit what he did. Part of me wants to tell him exactly what the last 5 years have been like. Part of me doesn't want to give him anything at all. What would you get from the conversation? I thought about it. Maybe closure. Maybe just the satisfaction of him knowing that I know what he did and that I didn't disappear. Do you need him to know that? No, I said. But I think I want him to. I wrote back, Julian, I appreciate you reaching out. I'll be in San Francisco next month for a book event. We can meet for coffee if you want, but I need you to understand that I'm not interested in reconciliation. I'm willing to hear what you have to say, but I'm not offering forgiveness. He replied, I understand. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. We met at a coffee shop in North Beach, 3 blocks from Rossi's, on a Thursday afternoon in April. He looked older, more worn. The confidence he'd had 5 years ago had been replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. We ordered coffee and sat at a table near the window. Thank you for meeting me, he said. Tell me why I'm here, I said. He took a breath. Because I owe you an apology, a real one, not the legal version, not the version I told myself to justify what I did, the actual truth. Okay, I said, tell me the actual truth. I planned it, he said, for more than a year before it happened. I forged your signature on the partnership agreement. I recruited witnesses to back me up. I systematically moved staff and suppliers to create dependencies that would support my version of events. I waited until your mother was dying because I knew you'd be vulnerable and distracted. I took everything you built and I told myself I deserved it because I had worked hard and you were lucky to have inherited a restaurant and I had to build everything from scratch. He stopped. His voice was rough. None of that was true, he said. You built Rossi's from your grandmother's legacy, but you rebuilt it into something completely new. You took a struggling red sauce restaurant and turned it into something excellent. Everything I thought I deserved was actually just me wanting what you had earned, and I took it by destroying you. I sat with that for a moment. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I lost the restaurant, he said. I looked up sharply. What? I lost Rossi's 6 months ago. I couldn't make rent after we lost the Michelin star. Reservations dropped, revenue dropped, I couldn't sustain the overhead. The landlord terminated the lease. The restaurant is closed. He looked at me directly. I know it was you. The inspector who pulled the star, it had to be you. I kept my face neutral. I was not going to confirm or deny. The irony, he said, is that you were right. The evaluation that pulled the star was right. The food had gotten worse. Not because I didn't care, but because I was never as good as you. I could execute your recipes and maintain your systems, but I couldn't create at the level you created. And without that, the restaurant was just good, and good wasn't enough. No, I said, good is never enough. I'm sorry, Alex, for all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know you lost years of your life to what I did, but I needed you to hear it from me directly, that I know what I did was wrong and that you deserved better. I looked at him across the table. At the person who had destroyed my life and who had now, apparently, destroyed his own through the consequences of that choice. Thank you for saying it, I said. It doesn't change what happened, but it matters that you said it. What are you going to do now? He asked. I'm going to keep writing, I said. I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep building things that are mine. What are you going to do? I don't know, he said. Find another kitchen somewhere, I guess. Start over. I'm 42 years old and I'm starting from zero. I was 40 when I started from zero, I said. After you took everything, it's possible to rebuild, but it's hard, and it requires being honest about how you got there. He nodded. We sat in silence for a moment, then I stood up. I have to go, I have an event tonight. Your book event? Yes, I bought a copy, he said. It's beautiful, Alex. Your grandmother would have been proud. Thank you, I said. I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. I am 43 years old. I am a senior Michelin guide inspector, which means I have the power to shape the careers and reputations of chefs and restaurants across the Western United States. I am the author of a book that tells the story of 3 generations of women cooking in Italian restaurants in San Francisco, and which has sold well enough that I'm working on a second one. I have an apartment in Los Angeles, 1 bedroom, nothing fancy, but it's mine and I pay the rent with money I earned. I have a small wooden box on my bookshelf with 47 recipe cards that are the only thing I took from Rossi's when I lost it. I don't own a restaurant anymore. I probably never will again, but I've built something different, a career that uses everything I know about food and restaurants in ways that don't require me to risk everything on a single establishment that someone else can take. Julian lost Rossi's 6 months ago. I confirmed it through public records. The lease terminated, the business dissolved. The space is now a bubble tea shop. I felt nothing when I found that out. Or not nothing, something small and complicated. The sense of an era ending, of a chapter closing completely. My grandmother's restaurant, which became my restaurant, which became Julian's restaurant, which became a bubble tea shop. The recipes are still in the box. The techniques are still in my hands. The knowledge is still in my head. The restaurant is gone, but what it was built from is still here. That's enough. That's everything. The photograph I don't have anymore, the one of me and Julian from the early days, both of us smiling in the kitchen, both of us believing we were building something together. I threw that away years ago. I kept the recipe cards. I kept the knowledge. I kept myself. And I built a life where no one can take any of it from me again. That's the power I have now. Not revenge, power. The power to evaluate restaurants on their actual merit and make recommendations that shape the industry. The power to write about food and cooking in ways that reach people who will never eat in fine dining restaurants, but who want to understand what makes food good. The power to walk through the world with a professional identity that is mine completely, and that exists independent of any physical space or any other person. Julian apologized. I accepted the apology in the limited way that you accept words that are true but insufficient. Rossi's is gone. The restaurant my grandmother built, that I rebuilt, that Julian stole and then lost, it's gone. But I'm still here. Cooking, writing, evaluating, building. Still here. That's the ending. That's enough.